Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, Season 06, Episode 17, where we delve into Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern British History, 4th edition. Can a political party, seemingly unconcerned with the plight of its working class and clinging to an outdated foreign policy, truly maintain its grip on power? Today we explore a decade that saw Britain navigate the height of imperialism, a brutal war, and a seismic shift in its global alliances.
That's absolutely right. And our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack this complex period, the conservative rule from 1895 to 1905.
Okay.
We'll look at the key figures, the ones who dominated the era. We'll explore those major conflicts that really tested Britain's resolve.
Right.
And how its global standing radically changed, plus the domestic pressures that, well, that ultimately set the stage for a huge political shift.
So we're digging deep into the source material.
Exactly. We're going to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, basically giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed about this really pivotal decade.
Great. So let's unpack this era. It was largely defined by conservative, or maybe we should say unionist, dominance. What was the core ideology underpinning their power back then?
Well, their foundation was this unwavering commitment to maintaining the union with Ireland and, crucially, expanding the British Empire.
That sounds central.
It wasn't just policy, it was like their identity. At the helm initially was Lord Salisbury. He was prime minister until 1902, and he even held the foreign secretary job at first.
Right, juggling both roles.
Yeah, and after him, his nephew, Arthur James Balfour, he stepped into the prime minister's office.
Okay, so Salisbury, then Balfour. But reading the material, it feels like someone else often stole the limelight, who was arguably the most influential figure, perhaps even overshadowing the PM.
Ah, you're thinking of Joseph Chamberlain, the Colonial Secretary.
That's him.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Lowe describes him as an outstanding figure, and that's largely down to his intense, very public focus on empire building.
So the empire was his main thing.
Absolutely. His vision for it was so central, so powerful, it often overshadowed the leadership of both Salisbury and Balfour. And, this focus initially really resonated with the public.
How so?
Well, we saw this huge surge of what was called jingoism, extreme patriotism, often quite aggressive, especially during the Boer War. And that really fueled their victory in the 1900 general election. Britain felt like it was at its imperial peak.
It sounds like a time of immense national pride, a feeling of strength. But was this popularity built on solid ground? Were there maybe cracks appearing even then?
That's a great question. Because that popularity, as strong as it seemed, it definitely contained the seeds of its own undoing.
How do you mean?
Well, while figures like Charles Booth and C-Bomb Rowntree were doing these groundbreaking investigations, revealing just dire poverty among the working classes.
Right, those famous studies.
Exactly. The government introduced remarkable few social reforms. There was this neglect, you could say, of domestic issues, and that started to create real resentment.
And that resentment had consequences.
Definitely. It directly contributed to the rise of the newly formed Labour Party, which, offered a different vision altogether.
Let's maybe circle back to Lord Salisbury for a moment. He's often painted as, well, a bit of a shadowy figure in history, someone who just sort of passively benefited from Liberal Party splitting over Irish Home Rule. Is that a fair picture?
It's certainly a common one. You see it repeated quite a bit. The historian Paul Smith, for instance, gives a pretty unflattering description.
Oh, yeah. What does he say?
He calls Salisbury the last great aristocratic figure of a political system that died with Victoria. A great whale irretrievably beached on the receding shore of the 19th century.
Wow, that's quite an image. A beached whale.
It is. Smith really points to Salisbury's deep resistance to democracy, his commitment to the status quo. He's a staunch believer in self-help for social problems, not state intervention. He even let Lord Randolph Churchill resign over wanting more reforms.
So the traditional view is this leader resistant to change, almost a relic. But Dr. Graham Goodlad offers a different take, suggesting Salisbury made a more positive contribution to keeping the Conservatives in power. What's Goodlad's argument?
Yeah, Goodlad's view is fascinating because he argues Salisbury was anything but passive. He might have personally disliked democracy.
Right.
But he shrewdly adapted to it. He actively appealed to new urban voters, especially in the Midlands and the North. He had quite an effective speaking style, apparently.
Interesting. So not just relying on old networks.
No. And he implemented what's called villatoryism through the 1884 Redistribution Act. This was clever. It created single-member constituencies specifically designed so conservative supporters in suburban areas, the villas, could elect their own MPs instead of getting lost in larger multi-member areas.
Ah, so more of a tactical master than just a bystander. Really building a modern party machine, then.
Precisely. He actively encouraged efficient local conservative associations and the Primrose League. They used social events, fetes, all sorts of things, to spread the conservative message across different social classes.
Clever.
And he was incredibly skillful at exploiting that liberal split over Ireland. For instance, in the 1886 election, he deliberately didn't run candidates against liberal unionist MPs. Just widen the gap.
Smart politics.
Very. Goodlad highlights Salisbury's exceptional skill in holding together a conservative party that, ironically, had serious potential for its own internal divisions. The real insight is how his quiet authority maintained unity.
And you only really saw that skill when he left.
Exactly. It became glaringly obvious only after his retirement, when the party just split disastrously over Joseph Chamberlain's tariff reform ideas.
So while Salisbury was, a leader with immense authority, making these contributions to conservative power, his ultimate philosophy, as Dr. Goodlad suggests, was that politics had been a slow, stubborn, rearguard action against change. That really captures a sense of struggling against the inevitable tide, doesn't it?
It truly does, a sense of holding the line. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it brings us neatly to a figure who was anything but static. Joseph Chamberlain.
Ah, yes, Chamberlain. His political journey is really quite unique, isn't it?
Absolutely remarkable.
From a prosperous manufacturer to this Birmingham radical and then morphing into an imperial visionary, quite the arc. How did he make such a profound impact locally before hitting the national stage?
Well, he retired early in 1876 from his successful screw-making factory. Apparently, he was genuinely driven by the appalling conditions in Birmingham.
So it was a mission for him.
It seems so. As mayor of Birmingham from 1873 to 76, his impact was just transformative. He used his business skills, his acumen to organize the Birmingham Liberal Association, securing council seats, getting a liberal majority by 1873.
And then he started changing the city itself.
Oh, massively. He pioneered what they called municipal socialism, buying up the town's gas and water companies, modernizing them. He appointed a medical officer of health, built a new hospital, set up a drainage board, extended street paving, lighting, opened public parks. His vision was clear, he said. The town shall not, with God's help, know itself.
That's incredible ambition for a city leader. And he didn't stop there, right? The university slum clearance?
Exactly. He founded the University of Birmingham's spearheaded slum clearance using the 1875 Artisans' Dwellings Act, creating areas like Corporation Street with quality housing. Birmingham became widely seen as a model of progressive local government, largely because of him.
So how did he take these domestic political skills and apply them when he moved into Parliament?
Well, when he got to Parliament as a Liberal MP, he quickly earned the nickname Radical Joe. He was seen as a real champion of the working classes.
Didn't pull any punches.
Not at all. He challenged anyone who stood in the way of social reform. He formed the National Liberal Federation, using these caucus techniques, basically, highly organized local party machinery for getting out the vote and picking candidates to run really effective election campaigns.
So organized and radical.
Yes. He was instrumental in pushing for the Third Parliamentary Reform Bill in 1884. And Lloyd George no less credited Chamberlain's unauthorized program of social reform published before the 1885 election for the Liberal victory that year. He was a major domestic force.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. How did this Radical Joe, this champion of the working class, become such an ardent imperialist, eventually siding with the conservatives? What drove that dramatic shift?
It's the big question about Chamberlain. His controversial move to the Conservatives, which actually split the Liberal Party over Irish Home Rule, it stemmed from this passionate, almost fervent belief in imperialism.
He saw it as the answer.
He was convinced that expanding the empire was the cure for trade depression and unemployment. He argued quite simply that the larger the empire, the more profitable British commerce would become.
An economic argument, then.
Partly, but there was also this deep belief in Britain's national mission to bring peace and civilization to backward peoples. The whole Pax Britannica idea, this British enforced peace and order across its empire, like the old Roman Empire.
And he put his money where his mouth was, so to speak?
He absolutely did. His commitment was so strong, he actually chose to be Colonial Secretary over becoming Chancellor of the Exchequer. That really shows where his priorities lay. He believed the empire held the key to Britain's future.
So he wasn't maybe abandoning his radicalism, but shifting its focus to a global scale. And as colonial secretary, he certainly racked up quite a few imperial achievements. What were some of the big ones?
Oh, he was incredibly active.
Yeah.
Successfully resolved the Venezuela dispute in '96, defeated Ashanti tribesmen that same year, settled the Nigeria-Dahomey frontier dispute with France by '98.
Is he a few years?
Very. He played a key role in reconquering Sudan in '98, which led to the Fashoda incident where British and French forces nearly came to blows. He also oversaw leasing Weihai Wei in China in '98. And crucially, after the Boer War, he brought the Transvaal and Orange Free State under British control. That eventually led to the Union of South Africa in 1910. He really lived his philosophy of being landlords of a great estate.
It sounds like he wasn't just about grabbing territory, but developing it too. What methods did he use for that?
Exactly right. He wasn't just about flags on maps. He encouraged joint stock companies to develop areas, often in return for trade monopolies, and he pushed for direct government funding through things like the Colonial Loans Act of 1899, which financed railways in places like Uganda and Sierra Leone.
Infrastructure.
Yes, and he initiated the founding of 2 schools of tropical medicine to tackle diseases that were hindering progress. He genuinely envisioned a sort of cohesive, developed empire.
But then came what Lowe describes as his fatal flaw, tariff reform.
Yeah.
Why was he so fixated on this, and what was the impact?
Tariff reform. He was deeply disappointed that he couldn't get an empire customs union agreed at the colonial conferences in 1897 and 1902. Britain was just too committed to free trade.
And tariffs were his solution.
Yes, tariffs to protect British industry and jobs and to create this imperial preference system binding the empire together economically. But politically, it was a disaster.
How so?
He resigned from the cabinet in 1903 to campaign for it, but it just fatally split the Conservative Party. And it directly contributed to their crushing defeat in 1906. It's quite something. Chamberlain is the only politician in British history to have split 2 major parties.
That's quite a legacy, a disruptive force for sure. And speaking of conflicts, this brings us inevitably to the brutal Boer War, a real test of empire. What were the tensions building up that led to this conflict?
It's a slow burn, really. You had President Paul Kruger in the Transvaal wanting to expand, but constantly being frustrated by British hemming-in efforts. Bechuanaland, Rhodesia, under Cecil Rhodes.
Ah, Rhodes, the diamond magnate.
It's exactly. Rhodes, founder of De Beers, had this burning ambition for British control over all of southern Africa. He dreamed of a Cape to Cairo railway. For him, the Transvaal just had to become part of the British Empire.
And then gold was discovered.
That was the game changer. Gold discovered in the Transvaal in 1886. It transformed it from a poor farming state into one of Africa's wealthiest. Kruger started buying arms, especially from Germany.
And then there was the Uitlander issue, a key flashpoint, wasn't it? Who were they, and how did they fit into the picture?
The Uitlanders' outsiders were mostly British settlers working in the gold mines. They vastly outnumbered the Boers themselves, but Kruger denied them political rights and taxed them heavily.
Which Rhodes tried to exploit.
He did. He tried to stir up an Uitlander revolution. This led straight to the infamous Jameson Raid in December 1895, a complete disaster.
How did it backfire?
Spectacularly. It confirmed all the Boers' fears about British intentions, drew international criticism. The German Kaiser even sent Kruger a congratulatory telegram and just pushed the Boers to arm even more heavily. And Chamberlain, back in London as Colonial Secretary, was actually implicated in the planning, which just poisoned Anglo-Boer relations further.
And it seems Sir Alfred Milner, the High Commissioner on the ground, really pushed things towards war.
Milner, yes, a passionate imperialist, handpicked by Chamberlain. Lowe says he deliberately set about provoking a crisis to destroy Kruger. He rejected Kruger's concessions, like offering a 7-year residency for the vote instead of the demanded 5, and then moved British troops up to the border.
Forcing Kruger's hand.
Essentially. When the Boers issued an ultimatum demanding troop withdrawal, Britain rejected it. The Boers then attacked Natal and the Cape. As Salisbury cynically put it, this liberated us from the necessity of explaining to the people of England why we are at war.
The war itself proved much tougher than the British expected, didn't it? We hear about Black Week in December 1899, defeats at Colenso, Majorsfontein, Stormberg, and the disaster at Spionkop. Why such a difficult start?
The Boers initially had the advantage. They actually outnumbered the British in the field. They were mounted, superb marksmen, knew the terrain inside out. and they had better artillery German Krupp's guns.
And the British response?
Initially, too many unmounted infantry, unfamiliar territory, hostile locals, and frankly, some pretty incompetent generalship. However, things changed. Vast reinforcements poured in. Lord Roberts and Kitchener took command.
Turning the tide.
Yes. They started outmaneuvering the Boers, relieving the sieges at Kimberley, Ladysmith, Mafeking. They captured the major cities, Bloemfontein, Johannesburg, Pretoria. Kruger himself had to escape to Europe.
But the Boers didn't just roll over. They switched to guerrilla warfare, which led to Kitchener's notorious methods of barbarism. What did that involve, and what was the reaction?
That's right, the war dragged on. To deny support to the Boer commandos, Kitchener implemented a scorched earth policy, destroying farms, burning crops,
Like grim stuff.
and rounding up the civilian population, women and children included, into what became known as concentration camps. The conditions were horrific. Overcrowded, mismanaged, epidemics broke out. Tragically, over 20,000 people died in those camps by 1901.
The reaction must have been strong.
Worldwide criticism. And at home, the Liberal leader, Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman, famously denounced them as methods of barbarism. It caused a huge outcry.
So the aftermath of the war was pretty significant. The Treaty of Vereeniging in 1902, though, sounds surprisingly generous. What were its terms, and what was the bigger impact of the war on Britain?
The treaty, yes, it annexed the Boer republics, but promised eventual self-government. It allowed Africans in schools and courts, and even provided £3 million in aid for reconstruction. And the Liberals, under Campbell Bannerman, actually granted that self-government in 1906, paving the way for the Union of South Africa in 1910.
But beyond South Africa?
The war starkly revealed Britain's isolation. Other European powers clearly sympathized with the Boers. It hammered home that Britain lacked real friends on the continent. This isolation, plus the immense cost, $200 million, over 20,000 British lives lost, led to widespread public disenchantment. People started questioning the value of it all. It turned a large section of public opinion against the Conservatives and really discredited imperialism itself.
Which leads us neatly into this major shift in global alliances and the whole question of splendid isolation. Was it ever really splendid, and what pushed Britain to look for friends after 1900?
Yeah, that term splendid isolation is a bit misleading, actually. Okay, Britain avoided binding military alliances between 1895 and 1900, but Salisbury was still very active in foreign policy, settling boundary disputes and so on.
So not totally isolated.
Not really ignoring the world. But Britain was isolated in the sense that it stood apart from the two main European power blocs, the Franco-Russian alliance and the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy.
So why the change after 1900?
Several factors converged. The Boer War, as we said, really highlighted Britain's vulnerability. There was ongoing hostility with France, Russian ambitions in Asia. India and China were a worry. And then there was the unpredictable Kaiser Wilhelm II in Germany.
And Germany's growing navy.
Exactly. Germany was rapidly building up its naval power with the Tirpitz Navy Laws of 1897 and 1900. That posed a direct challenge to Britain. Plus, Lord Lansdowne took over the Foreign Office from Salisbury in 1900, bringing a fresh perspective. And Russia's growing influence in northern China and Manchuria was becoming a major concern.
So attempts at a German alliance failed, even with Chamberlain pushing for it. What was the first successful step Britain took to find new friends?
Right. Chamberlain tried for a German alliance in 98 and 99, but Berlin wasn't interested. The first big successful move was the Anglo-Japanese Alliance in 1902.
What did that involve?
Basically, mutual recognition of interests in China and the Pacific. Crucially, if Japan went to war with Russia, Britain would stay neutral. But, and this was the key bit, if another power, meaning France, joined Russia, then Britain would support Japan.
Significant implications.
Huge. It effectively checked Russian expansion in the Far East, and it did lead to the Russo-Japanese War, which Japan won. Interestingly, the historian K.M. Wilson argues this alliance was actually geared towards maintaining British isolation from the great powers of Europe, rather than towards ending it.
How so? That sounds counterintuitive.
His point is that it addressed specific imperial threats in Asia without getting Britain tangled up in European alliance politics. It let Britain manage threats to its empire far away without needing European partners.
Interesting take. And then, quite remarkably, came the Anglo-French Entente Cordiale in 1904. This seems, well, highly unlikely given the recent hostility over Fashoda and the Boer War. What brought that about?
It was highly unlikely. Relations have been terrible. But several things shifted. France, realistically, didn't want war with Britain and saw Germany as their main long-term enemy. They were also worried about their ally, Russia, getting bogged down in war with Japan, Britain's new ally.
So, strategic recalculations in Paris.
Yes. The French Foreign Minister Delcasse worked tirelessly to improve relations. Chamberlain himself wanted to sort out colonial squabbles. Lansdowne saw it as a way to counter the German naval buildup and maybe even improve relations with Russia via France. And don't forget, King Edward VII's Charm Offensive, his visit to Paris in 1903, really helped smooth things over.
So, what were the key terms of this entente, this friendly understanding, and how did it change Britain's position?
Essentially, they traded colonial interests. France gave Britain a free hand in Egypt and Sudan. In return, Britain recognized French interests in Morocco. They also sorted out loads of other long-running disputes: Newfoundland fisheries, borders in Gambia, spheres of influence in Siam, Madagascar, the New
Just
Hebrides.
tidying up the map.
Pretty much. Now, it wasn't a formal military alliance, let's be clear. It was a friendly understanding. But the Kaiser immediately saw it as an anti-German move. And paradoxically, his reaction actually pushed Britain and France closer together, effectively shifting Britain away from any potential German alignment in the years leading up to World War I.
All these huge shifts internationally. But back home, the conservative grip was clearly slipping by this point. Arthur Balfour, Salisbury's nephew and successor, he had a bit of a mixed legacy, didn't he? Seen as intellectual, but maybe lacking strong direction.
That's a very fair assessment. He was known for his intellect, definitely, but also for a certain aloofness, perhaps a lack of decisiveness. Despite that, though, Balfour's government did notch up some important achievements.
Such as?
Well, domestically, there was the Education Act of 1902, hugely controversial, especially with nonconformists who hated paying rates to support Anglican schools, but it did create a national system for secondary education.
Okay. Anything else?
Wyndham's Land Purchase Act in 1903 was actually quite successful in Ireland, offering generous terms for tenants to buy their land. And the Licensing Act of 1904, though unpopular with brewers and temperance reformers alike, was an attempt to tackle the complex issue of compensating pubs whose licenses weren't renewed.
And what about defense? Balfour seems to have made some key contributions there that really shaped things for the future.
Yes, absolutely. In defense, Balfour became chairman of the Committee of Imperial Defense, really looking strategically at the empire's military needs. Sir John Fisher was appointed First Sea Lord, a crucial appointment.
Fisher, the naval reformer.
The very same. Under him, they created the powerful Atlantic Fleet, and most famously, authorized the building of the revolutionary dreadnought battleship. Launched in 1906, just after they left office, this ship, with its all-big gun armament and steam turbines, literally made every other battleship in the world obsolete overnight, a massive shift in naval power.
And foreign policy under Balfour.
Well, the Anglo-French Entente of 1904 was signed under his government, a major achievement. And he also passed the Aliens Act of 1905. This was the first real restriction on immigration into Britain.
Why was that brought in?
It was prompted mainly by a large influx of poor Jewish immigrants fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe. There were complaints about alien paupers undercutting wages and straining resources in areas like London's East End. The act restricted entry for those who couldn't prove they were political refugees, had enough money, or were likely to find work.
Right. So despite these legislative achievements, Balfour's government became overwhelmingly unpopular by 1905. This is really the core question. Why did conservative power decline so dramatically?
They ultimately paid the price for deeper, longer-term shortcomings, many of which you could argue stem from Salisbury's time as well. Perhaps the most significant issue was the almost complete lack of major social reform over the previous 20 years.
The neglect we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Both Salisbury and Balfour were strong believers in self-help. They just refused to let the state take responsibility for things like old age pensions, sickness benefits, or unemployment support, unlike, say, Bismarck's social insurance schemes over in Germany. This inaction looked increasingly out of step, especially as the liberals started talking more about social welfare.
So while the liberal had been divided for years, the conservatives basically ignored the growing problems faced by the working classes. What impact did that have, especially with things like the Taff Vale case?
Taff Vale. That was huge. The trade union movement became fiercely hostile after that case in 1900, where a union was ordered to pay massive damages for losses caused by a strike.
Making strikes impossible.
Virtually impossible without risking bankruptcy. And the government's failure to pass legislation to reverse this decision. It caused a massive surge of working-class support towards the new Labor Party. They saw labor as their only hope.
So social neglect, trade union anger, what else?
Add to that the lingering backlash from the Boer War. The cost, the lives lost, the public disgust over the methods of barbarism in the concentration camps. Imperialism itself lost its shine for many people.
And their own recent laws weren't popular either, you said.
Definitely not. The Education Act angered nonconformists. The Licensing Act pleased almost nobody. They were definite vote losers. But the Chinese slavery affair really poured fuel on the fire, didn't it?
Explain that one again briefly.
It was Balfour's disastrous decision to allow thousands of indentured Chinese laborers into the Transvaal gold mines. They were kept in awful, barrack-like conditions, paid very low wages. It sparked outrage from British trade unions fearing wage cuts, and also from self-governing colonies like Australia and New Zealand who had white Australia policies. Balfour's dismissive attitude just made it worse. It looked callous and exploitative.
So, a catalog of problems. But the final nail in the coffin, the thing that really split the conservatives and united their opponents, was the tariff reform controversy.
That was the fatal blow. Absolutely crucial. This was Chamberlain's big crusade, remember. Tariffs to protect British industry from German and U.S. competition, and to create this imperial preference system.
But Balfour didn't fully back it.
No. Chamberlain resigned from the cabinet in 1903 to campaign freely for it. Balfour tried to find a compromise, maybe using tariffs just for retaliation, but it pleased nobody. It wasn't enough for Chamberlain and his followers, and for the free traders within the Conservative Party, any tariff was unacceptable.
And the Liberals seized on this division.
They pounced. This internal conservative civil war was a golden opportunity for the Liberals, who had been divided themselves for years. They united powerfully in defense of free trade, specifically framing it as protecting cheap food for ordinary families against the expensive food that tariffs would supposedly bring.
The big loaf versus small loaf campaign.
Exactly. That became the potent symbol, and it's what led directly to the crushing defeat of 1906. Balfour made a tactical error, resigning in December 1905 without dissolving Parliament first. He hoped the Liberals would struggle to form a government.
A gamble that backfired.
Monumentally. The Liberals, under Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman, quickly united, formed a government, and immediately called a snap election for January 1906. They swept to power in a landslide.
What were the numbers?
Massive Liberal victory, 400 seats. The Unionist Conservatives and Liberal Unionists crashed down to just 157. Balfour himself even lost his Manchester East seat, which he'd held for 20 years. While all those other issues played their part, the tariff reform question was arguably the crucial one that finally broke the Conservatives' long grip on power. It showed how one big, divisive policy could unravel everything.
So we've covered a decade, 1895 to 1905, that really did showcase a Britain grappling with its imperial identity, facing the harsh realities of a brutal, costly war, and navigating a rapidly changing global stage. It definitely answers our opening question implicitly. How a party, seemingly disconnected from domestic problems and clinging to older ideas about foreign policy, eventually lost its power. It proves that, public feeling, economic realities, party divisions, these can be much more potent than traditional political strength.
Absolutely. And this whole period raises a really important question, perhaps for you, the listener, to think about. Given the historical analysis, like K.M. Wilson's view on the Japanese alliance, and considering the domestic costs of imperial overreach shown by the Boer War and its fallout, did the choices made during this decade truly strengthen Britain for the challenges of the 20th century? Or did they, perhaps inadvertently, set the stage for its relative decline and draw it into even deeper global entanglements? What lessons, if any, can we draw today about that tricky balance between global ambition and domestic well-being?